I have a question. Everett,
Sure.
did you choose Stewart Brand? Was it your choice or was it a committee choice or what inspired you?
That's a good question. Well, strangely enough, there was not a film made about Stewart Brand by the time we kind of got to it. Oh, there he is. He's back there. We started without you, but it's okay. In terms of Stewart Brand as a subject, so I think lots of people had approached Stewart about making a film about him. I think just over the course of his life, everyone was like, at every stage, they're like, "Can we make something about you?" And he largely kind of shunned them off and like he punted them. And then by the time we started kind of shaping this idea, so just a little backstory is like the directors Jason and David run Structure Films, and I was at Stripe Press, and then we kind of met working on a different shoot. And then I was telling them I was looking for a project to help support as a producer. They had just kind of started this idea with Stuart, and we're basically trying to get him on board with the project. Their last film was about Bill Nye the Science Guy, and I think when Stuart saw that, he was already kind of at that stage in his life where he's like, okay, I'm ready to let someone tell my story. And then I think he liked the last film that they made. In terms of me getting involved, I had known about Stuart since even my time here at ArtCenter, just with the whole Earth catalog and all that stuff. Working at Facebook. What wasn't really in the film was Stuart Brand also created this platform called The Well, which is like the earliest kind of internet social network, and that kind of was like the proto Facebook. So we, in the early days, were like really kind of big admirers of him. So long way of saying there was a lot of interest in him, but Stuart trusted us to bring his story to life, which was really really meaningful. So
Excellent, excellent. So, and thank you for bearing with me on my bathroom break here. Um, so, um, uh, with regards to the way in which this film intersects with your career, one of the things that I picked up on in hearing you speak and listening to the companies that you've worked for is that you're you're able to work in very early phase of an organization's development, and particularly with ideas that often in these organizations, these startups, might seem very lofty or sort of outside of the box. How has your foundation from Art Center prepared you for those types of roles and those types of kind of um, sort of foundational design work at an early stage?
yeah, that's well, on the one hand, like I don't think anything prepares you for something that is like kind of very nascent and not really formed. You just kind of wing it most of the time. But Gloria and I were chatting earlier where there's like these kind of brackets here at Art Center, where there's kind of transdisciplinary study, emphasis on technology and all these things kind of coming together. And then there's this very analog, almost like this very fundamental way of thinking and making and doing that now kind of at this stage is very intuitive, just like making with your hands and thinking and building is just like it's a very primitive thing, but it's also still like a foundational way of building stuff. So at least in terms of how that kind of carried me through my career, it's just like building that foundational way of thinking and seeing things that is agnostic to anything specific. Even though we used tools like letterpress and we also like used computers when things like Adobe were just like starting out. Like I think like Quark was still like the primary way to set type, and Photoshop was still like pretty young. So all these tools were evolving, but the way of thinking was still again, it was still like pretty foundational. So my first job out of Art Center was at a museum. Like I worked here at the Getty Center, doing exhibition design, and then kind of took a left turn and went into tech because it was at that very early stage of tech where like no one wanted to work in house, like everyone wanted to work in agencies and be that type of creative. So for me, it was almost like just a blue sky like opportunity to kind of do whatever we wanted because frankly like none of us knew better. We were just like doing stuff that worked and just making it happen. So
And I guess now, as you've covered this course of foundational software and technology startups that are now integrated into how we think about the internet, how we think about social media. You're moving into a new role and working with Anthropic. What are some of the things that you bring to that role that are unique, and how does that situate itself in the company?
Yeah, that's another good question because I'm still figuring it out. I'm like quite new there, and the company is also quite new. Um, I think one of the ways that I like framed myself coming out of ArtCenter was like, yes, I studied design here, but I was much more of a storyteller, like kind of on all levels. Like, I think it was Lou Danziger here who he said this thing, and it really stuck in my brain where he was like, the most important design tool is Microsoft Word. Like, at the time, Microsoft Word, but basically like a very fundamental writing tool to like articulate your thoughts. And then, that's kind of served me well because I always like start design with writing and I kind of shape my thoughts that way. But in the context of AI, which is, you know, building these large language models that are kind of trained on this corpus of like human communications, and then language as like this fundamental defining trait of humans. Like for me, there's a lot of overlap with how the computers are kind of understanding technology and how we're learning to communicate with the machines, but also me as like a storyteller trying to find the overlap between those two things and then really bring it back to why it's important for people, not just like why it's a cool tool. And I think that's why this film was actually really meaningful for me because a lot of the stuff they said was like it's about building tools and technology, but Stewart always tried to find a way to bring it back to humans and society and the world. And for me, that's kind of the lens that I take. So I'm at Anthropic, we're building AI tools, and that's like the hot thing that everyone's talking about it. But at the same time, it's really just like a different a different form of technology that helps kind of human creativity and ingenuity scale. So like how do we make people care about that stuff in a way that doesn't freak them out? That's kind of like my role there.
That's fascinating. And do you get to work with Stuart at all on his or your shared perspective on how AI might be one of those next whole Earth catalog type of motivators or game changers?
Stewart and Kevin Kelly and all the folks in this film, they're just like rabid. Anytime like a new tool comes out, they're the first to like jump on it. So even like when AI, like when people were still like freaking out about it, they're using it every day pretty religiously. So I get to like talk to them a lot about it, which is kind of funny because they're just like sending me messages and stuff like, "Oh man, ChatGPT is amazing and Claude's amazing," but even people like my age and younger are still like dubious about it. So I don't know. I think that's pretty interesting, but they have this like pretty optimistic way to embrace technology, and I share a lot of that. But I think in the film, this guy Peter Coyote was like, "Oh, you need to have some doubt in it," and I think having that little bit of skepticism, or at least just kind of thinking through things critically, is pretty important. So even though I look up to these folks, I idolize them, I'm also like, okay, well, I'm on the ground every day. Like, how do I like just have a practical lens to it, but still have that optimism?
That's excellent, and I think well, there's definitely space for questions from the audience. What you're representing here in that dialogue and that kind of big picture thinking, but also core skepticism or sort of stepping back a bit, I think, is often hard to do with the pace of technology and the sort of struggle to keep up to date. Perhaps if there aren't any questions, what advice might you give to people who are beginning to work in this space, or students who might be a little bit concerned about where technology might be headed or how they might contribute to that?
Advice, I don't know. Let me think. Well, again, another kind of thing I learned from Stuart, but also like try to find my own flavor of it, is this concept of fearlessness. When the pranksters were doing stuff and they're pushing it and all these hackers were doing it, I feel that way too. Even when I was young, I grew up and I was like really into like street art and punk rock and all of these things that like were about pushing things further. For me, that's like not really any different than what I do in a professional capacity. You know, I'm still trying to push things in many ways to make people feel uncomfortable with the things we're doing. And then how do we like find that threshold where people are kind of a little nervous about it, and then you kind of rein it back a little bit, because I think largely it's like when you're developing things, you're just looking at, okay, here's this cool thing, and now it's starting to make people uneasy. Um, and then you're kind of at like, I don't know, that's a good point to be at, but you also don't want to like again freak people out. But I don't. My advice is really just to just keep pushing and doing stuff, even if you don't think that you have the agency or the capacity to do it. And I don't know. The worst thing you could do is fail, and then you just like do something else. So.
A question.
What stood out to me? Oh God, there's so many parts. It's really hard because I was like so intimately involved with every stage of it. Um, I don't know. I'm a sucker for like history and nostalgia. So like that, and I live in San Francisco, so those kind of early days of the Haight Ashbury scene, like I live right there, and I just kind of got to see it from the source himself. So that for me was, I mean, it's more of like an emotional thing, because I moved to San Francisco to kind of capture some of that energy that was there. Um, but certainly the clock for me, I think was, I don't know, it's, to some people might think it's just bananas and it's like a ridiculous thing, and to a large degree it kind of is, because it's like you see those scenes and it's like James Bond, like you're in this like evil villain's lair there. But I don't know, just really if you're able to think about it artistically and conceptually, you're like, wow, I can't believe they pulled this thing off. It's like a pretty amazing feat, not just like how to get support and funding for it, but also like the engineering behind it. But really, I think it's because the concept is so strong, like getting people to think on these long time horizons is not an easy thing. And a lot of people just like politicians, like, and just our generation thinks of the next generation and like, what are we going to leave our kids? But it's really like, will this planet even be here? So I don't know, that for me was like a little bit more of a light bulb moment. I like them. Mammoths are super cool. In terms of them, like actually, is it feasible for it to come back, or is the idea like strong, or what do you think? This is also like an area where I'm quite torn, and honestly, like, well, as a person, like I have opinions, but like as from a science perspective, I'm not qualified to like really kind of think through that. But I think genuinely, I mean, I'm fascinated by the approach and the learnings that they'll glean from it. I'm also dubious that it'll actually be like achievable. Um, but in terms of things like applying it to certain things like chestnut trees and plants that are maybe a little bit more foundational to the planet, not that like living or like mammals aren't, but I think in the capacity that they did it with a chestnut tree, that feels more like Earth's infrastructure or trees and plants, and a way to kind of maintain that through kind of assisted evolution, I think is a really fascinating way to apply this concept, that they're just using mammoths as like, it's kind of like the lightning rod, or that is like the branding moment, because everyone is like drawn towards this concept of bringing back a woolly mammoth. But I think they're using that as a way to like raise awareness and then maybe get more interest and funding in some of these other potentially more like practical things that will happen in our lifetimes. But again, I don't know. At a personal level, I as a documentarian, I tend to be like pretty objective when I'm like trying to look at these things. So I'm trying to not be biased about these things when I'm making something like this. At the same time, I just have a certain amount of skepticism and also fascination. So I don't know. It's kind of a non-answer, but. Sure. Yeah, I'd say, I mean, I definitely do. And like at every company I've been at, I think has been some kind of step jump in the way that humans use technology and computers and the internet. Because, at Facebook, and, there's a lot about of Facebook that I like vehemently disagree with. And it's still not sure if it's like net beneficial to society. But at the same time, at the time that I was there, it was foundational communications infrastructure, in the way that telephones were or something like that, So that's the lens that we were looking through it. But then there's this kind of, manipulation layer that's happening on top of it, which is, I think, the potential for AI, because it's now bad actors are able to access these like super powerful language models that can deceive people, in a way that's different than social media. Anthropic specifically is an AI safety and research lab. So like largely what we do is research the technology in ways to enforce like pretty strict regulations. So like a lot of our work is like advocacy in DC, like trying to push for even stricter regulate. There's not really any regulations right now, but to impose like pretty strict safety and regulatory guidance around it. And by kind of default, because we're researching these technologies pretty deeply, then theoretically we would build the safest tools for people to use and build upon. So that's kind of our model towards it. So I lost myself in that question. What was there something else I meant to answer? Or yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Well, it's hard to decouple both of those, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Like I think what happens in the next, frankly, in the next 6 months is like very important towards the trajectory of where these things go. So I think it's evolving so rapidly that we have to think on short cadences, but also again like make sure that these safety measures are in place so that it can scale long term, which is I think kind of the most important thing. Like there's no real way to like predict or anticipate how it's going to be used. So if we put like these kind of bright guardrails and measures from the beginning, which like frankly didn't happen in the early days of the internet and social media and all that stuff, then there's at least a better chance that it's going to be used in a more appropriate way. Um, there's many flavors of AI, which is why I think it's really hard to parse, especially like in the media, where it's like, and here at like ArtCenter in a creative institution, people are like, oh, using Mid Journey is like now taking away these concept artist jobs. Like that's like one flavor of AI, but I think just the foundational models behind it are really about like scaling people's ingenuity and like helping spin up like little autonomous things. So I'm kind of like rambling a little bit about the technology, but hopefully it doesn't take away people's things. It actually just like magnifies them so that they can do more with having these tools that are very aligned with them, and that's kind of like more the long-term thing. That is a great question. I wish I knew like the right way to approach it. I don't know. I think largely that's like always been the role of the artist. Like I think artists in general is like someone that is like genuinely like embodying the spirit of being an artist. Is like they're taking anything like very disparate things like technology, whether it's like super advanced or super primitive, and then trying to like shed light on it in a different way. So I think in terms of that form of counterculture, it's going to take someone that's like has that little bit of skepticism about it, but also like it cares enough to like really dive into the thing and make something unique with it, whether it's like social commentary or it's like actually something that's useful or interesting. I think right now it's just so nascent, and it's really like there's just not a lot of people really doing that. It's more theoretical talk about it. So I like to think of it as like I think with my hands, so like I make stuff, and that for me is a way to like show something. It's an artifact, or it's, I don't know, whatever it is. And I think people just need to make more stuff with it so that people could react to it positively or negatively, and then someone will take that and build upon it. And I think that's just how things start to normalize and level out. But for now, it's just like it's almost like the extinction where everyone's debating it, but like it hasn't happened yet. So it's all kind of hypothetical stuff. Not that I'm saying that they should bring back a woolly mammoth tomorrow, but I don't know. I think it's hard to kind of talk at that level without people actually doing the work. So. Yeah, people suck sometimes, but people are cool too. I don't know. It's what do you do? Oh man, I don't know. It's a tough one because like I think in that generation and that era, there were just like not as many of those people. I guess so. Someone that did something, it became a big deal, or just like the era of the rock star. Like you can't be a rock star. You can't be. I don't know. There's so many industries and fields where you can't be like the main thing now because it's so easy to just like have your own platform to have millions of followers and still not be at that level. I don't know. It's really weird. So yeah, just like he's in many ways he's like a rock star in like the kind of science and tech field. And I think it's really hard to do that these days. I guess like at least at to get to that magnitude of influence that someone like Stewart has. Definitely like hmm, it's hard to say because again, like I work in the tech industry, but I will caveat this, like I am the least technical person. Like and I worked in the letterpress, and that was like my jam was like ink and paper and all that stuff. Um, and I still have a large degree of skepticism towards it, but for me, I think it's really important to again like immerse myself in it and engage as a way for myself to learn, but also try and kind of find some truth in that stuff, and then see if there are other people that resonates with. So I don't know. This is a long-winded way of saying, like, I don't know that answer. It's like there's no one really that I could see, but there are people that are moving industries, but it's really kind of hard to equate them to Stewart because there's so few people like that these days. Yes.
Your story process.
Thank you so much. Yes. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you so much. Yeah, again, there was like this stellar creative team, so I'd say like a large part was the kind of directing and cinematography behind it. But as the kind of core creative team, there's just a handful of us. It's like pretty important that this wasn't just like a hagiography of someone and like, oh, here's all these cool things that this old person did in the 60s, and then, like there's so many documentaries on Netflix that you could watch that are like that. But the fact that Stewart is still like pushing himself today and he's like 80 something years old, I think that's why he resonated as a character for us, because it's a contemporary story. It's like literally what he's doing today. And the clock is like, it's still happening, but he's already moved on to all these other things. He's writing more books and doing more things. So I think the fact that he was still at the forefront of all of these things actually was really important. A lot of the footage, like all of the historic footage, first from the 60s, that was all his, like because he was a photographer and a cinematographer. So we were lucky to have that source material. But even like the way back footage of the black and white stuff, like his dad was actually like a really good documentarian of their family life. So all that stuff was home video footage. So we just had this amazing source material. In terms of like sequencing the kind of, because there's so many different milestones in his life that are all seemingly disparate, I think we just experimented quite a bit. And like it was a bit like modular where we're like, okay, should the clock sequence go here? Should the chestnut tree go here? Should the hippie thing go here? And there are different permutations of that edit, and I think it could have landed in any way, but I think that's the one that we felt most comfortable with. And it did jump around a little bit, but I think it was, hopefully it like emphasized Stewart's arc by like going back and then going forward, and it wasn't just like a linear story. And I think that was really important for us. Sure. It's a good question because you can rent it on iTunes if you want, or Amazon Prime. So it is distributed in North America and Canada. So it did premiere like, I don't even remember. I want to say like in mid 2022. We don't have international distribution for it. I mean, the idea was to premiere at South by Southwest and go to all these film festivals and then sell it to like a platform. And then COVID threw a wrench in all of our things and threw a wrench in the whole industry. And I think it's actually like a really tough time for documentary filmmakers. Um, it's really hard to get your work acquired by these bigger platforms, So I think the industry is quite different. But right now, a distributor does have it. You can reach it, but I mean, you can rent it. Ideally, we get international distribution so more people can see it, but that's a longer term thing.
All right, all right. Thank you very much. I think that
Thanks,
concludes
everyone.
our Q&A.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Everett.
Robbie and Max and Gloria and everyone.
Thank you for being here. A real treat for us to kick off Creative Tech Week.
Thank you.
Thank you.